Hello, everyone. My name is Alexander Lucard, and I am an HMIS System Administrator for Montgomery County. In today's training, we're going to look at the HUD Standards Information in the Admin Profile section of HMIS. This is only going to be for agency administrators or system administrators. Other users will not be able to see or access this section, but it is good to know about for the purposes of doing a training, because you never know, someday you yourself might become an agency administrator for your agency. So let's talk about this section and just how to monitor it, just to make sure the information is correct. We're going to go over here on our left-hand side of our screen, and we're going to click on the admin button. We click on that, and this takes us to our provider admin button over here on the right-hand side of your screen. It's the middle one in the admin dashboard. There's all these buttons here, but the only one we're worrying about in terms of our HUD standards information is going to be our provider admin button. We click on this, and this is going to take us to all of our providers. Again, we can see these are all the providers within HMIS. Because I'm a system administrator, I can see access to all 315. You yourself will only have access to your agency's program. Now we can just grab any program we want. So for example, let's grab, in this case, we're going to grab Catholic Charities Kit. It's a program that no longer exists. And we'll just do some work with it. Okay. So once we found the program that we want, we'll take the individual program. We click on the pencil. We are never going to click on the trash can because this would delete the provider itself, and we never want to do that. We want to click on the pencil because this is the edit button. And what we're going to do here is we're going to look at our standards information. And all we're going to do is, just like with our provider profile that we've looked at in a previous training, we're going to look at this once a year just to make sure the information looks correct. We've got our provider name. Good. We've got our parent provider. KIP Individual Catholic Charities belongs to Catholic Charities Services Agency. We can see that they are using HMIS. They're a HUD/HMIS provider. That should be checked for all your programs. Why? Because you're in HMIS right now. So make sure that this is checked. Errors compliant. Are you using errors for things like your service transaction? You know, that's that drop-down menu list with all those different little codes. If you are doing service transactions for Montgomery County, you almost certainly are doing errors. So this should be checked. Right? Are you using Service Point? Service Point is the HMIS that we're using. See, we're in the Service Point training site, so this should be checked. And operational, was your program operational? That does not mean is it still operational. It just means, has it ever been in operation? So that would be if maybe you set up a program and it's not going to start until 2023, but you still put it in the system. You'd leave this blank until it's turned on. And now we're going to look at the various standards for our program. As you can see here, when we click the error standard information button, all this information about errors came up. It's okay, we don't have to worry about it. We're not doing licensing, we're not doing accrediting bodies. It only comes up when you have the errors compliant button checked. But it's nice to get this information in if we can. This is not as important as the HUD standards information, but just in case, if you have this checked, we do want to have this filled out. You know, in this case would be a site because we're doing it at the site level. HIP Individual is a site program. Catholic Charities is the agency. Since we're in HIP Individual, we'd be doing the site. You put in your EIN number, what type of facility it is, year of incorporation, legal status, capacity, type, and service. They're giant boxes in case you need to fill something out, maybe 1 or 2 sentences, nothing major. Don't have to worry about the provider maintaining, because of course, we're already in it. You know, if we have any accrediting bodies for adoption, child daycare, emergency shelter, foster home help, only fill out the stuff that actually applies to you. So for example, if you're a permanent housing program, none of this is going to apply to you. Payment methods, again, probably not going to apply to you. You're more than likely just going to leave it at no fees charged. So again, the errors standards information is only going to appear if you are an errors compliant program. And if you are, fill out what you can. This is not as important as what we're going to look at here, which is the HUD standards information. Now, we do try to maintain this on our end on the HMIS side of things. Myself, Bays, and Ashley are going to be looking at all of this. However, some of this you will know and we won't. For example, I know that HIP Individual is a program that no longer exists, right? It's Catholic Charities is no longer doing HIP. And so this program is no longer active. It's no longer operating. So then the question would be, where's that operating end date? And it's purposely not here because this is the training site. This is for training purposes. It's not like they've left it open, so it's okay. However, as long as this is open, HMIS and then programs that we feed HMIS into, such as HDX, Stella, PDX, things like that, are going to say, hey, this program is still active. So we're always going to want to make sure that we have an operating start date in there that is more or less correct. I mean, it doesn't have to be exactly to the day. If this actually started on like 2/22, that's fine. All right. What we really want to pay attention to here is this section. You need to go through all of your programs that your agency has. And if the program is no longer active, we want to put an end date in. So for example, this would be like 010/01/2020, something like that. And of course, if there's still a client in there, it's going to say, hey, you can't use that operating end date because there is like one client in the system with no exit date, or an entry exit that overlaps the operating date, or an entry that starts after that end date. And that's because we use this a lot for training purposes because it's a dead program. But if you get a warning like this, that's how you know, and there's that angry red triangle that HUD verification people know all about. It's going to say you can't use this date because there's someone still in the program. Yep. And as you see, even if I did 10/22/22, there's still someone in that program in the training site, which means someone has used this particular HIP program, as a test program for putting something in. Maybe it was just a client to show someone how to enter it, or notes or something like that. But for all of your programs that are no longer active, you want to have an end date in there. For your programs that are active, you want to have an operating start date that more or less confirms to their actual operating start date. Getting it within a ballpark of the same month or so, that's great. And again, that's something that we might not know. Bays and I, at the time of this recording, have only been here for a year, Ashley a little bit longer. And so if the program died 10 years ago, we aren't going to have any historical knowledge of that. But you, your agency will, because it's your program, you'll have records of when it started and when it ended. So we want to make sure that for each program that has ever existed for your agency, that we have an operating start date in there. And then if it's no longer active, we have an operating end date as well. That's really the only thing you need to touch here, but it's so important that we get these start and end dates in. Everything else we can just quickly look at. Organization identifier, we're just going to leave it alone because it's in Montgomery County's continuum of care. Leave that alone. Victim service provider, this is if you're doing, victim services, yes or no. Are you in the Montgomery County continuum of care? You would be, otherwise you wouldn't be in here. We've got yes. Project type, just double check. As we can see here, this is permanent supportive housing, but if it's actually supposed to be, say, OPH, we turn it to housing with services, no disability required. And we can see here's that drop in. Just make sure that everything looks right. Because sometimes the program changes type. I know I've had a program that's changed from, a permanent housing to permanent supportive housing or things like that. Emergency shelter tracking method. Here in Montgomery County, we're doing all entry exit date because we use entry exit. We don't just use shelter point, we use both. So it's going to be entry exit date. However, in DC, our shelters, only do shelter points. So it'd be night by night. But for Montgomery County here, just leave it alone. It should be entry exit date if it's filled out at all for an emergency shelter. In this case, this is the permanent housing program, so it's okay, it's blank. Same with rapid rehousing. Same with street outreach. They're all going to be empty. Housing type, Are you a site-based clustered, site-based single, or are you tenant-based scattered site? Just double check and make sure that's right. Target population, do you specifically only work with DV victims? Do you only work with HIV clients? Otherwise, just leave it at NA. And same with target population A. Do you have a specific gender and age that you guys are doing? Households with children only, couples without children only, single males 18 and older, youth females under 25, so that'd be 18 to 24. If you have any of those target populations, you can put it in here. And then, are you or are you not a HOPWell-funded medical assistance living facility? Yes, no, NA. Most of our programs are going to be NA. We don't have a lot of HOPWell funding here in Montgomery. Principal site, grant type, and service transaction workflow. Which is, for all of your programs, you're pretty much going to have no. You're going to leave the grant type blank, unless you're a PATH program. In this case, because they're not HUD funded, it's HIP. They're not HOPWell funded. They're not PATH funded. You would have whatever's correct. So if you're a HUD funded program, you do HUD. If you're a PATH program, you'd have PATH here. In this case, blank is good because HIP is not funded in that way, in any of the ways in this drop-down menu. And finally, your service transaction workflow program does not use entry exit. We're going to want that to be no. All right. And so this is your HUD standard information. Most of this we can maintain for you. We at the HMIS team can maintain for you. But the operating start date and the operating end date, those are the big ones that we want you guys to look at. Make sure it's there. Because again, the program was active 10 years ago, but stopped being active 8 years ago, we're not going to have any record of it, more than likely. And we're not going to know. And we just want this filled in for historical accuracy. Your agency is going to know when your programs were active and when they ended. So we just want to try and get that information in. If you think any of the rest of it needs to be changed, even if you do it yourself, please email the HMIS team, HMIS at montgomerycountymd.gov, and just say, hey, we made this change. Here's why, just to be safe. Because I know you're not in here very often, and something might be set up for a specific reason. But more than likely, the only thing you're ever going to have to touch is the operating start date and end date. And that's for those very old programs that we wouldn't have any historical record. COC code, this should automatically be in there, so you don't have to worry about it. The MD601, start date to end date. That's just going to be when your program started or when it ended and when it was active in Montgomery County. And then the bed and unit inventory we're going to cover in our third training for agency admins. And we're going to cover that then. So we're going to skip that for right now because this is going to be its own special training because it's important that you guys understand it and keep up with it. Federal partner program and components, this is just going to say what your funding source is. In this case, it's a HIP individuals grant that started on 2/18, and this should be ended as well. Again, this is just the training site. The only reason it's open is because this is set up for the training purposes, so you can see what it looks like when it's open. If we were on the live site and you could see it, you could see when exactly HIP individual for Catholic Charities did. And retired fields, you don't have to worry about those because they're retired. They no longer exist. If anything's filled out, it's simply because they were filled out back when they were active and it's just grandfathered. So one last time, what we really want you to take a look at is the operating start date and end date. But this gives you all sorts of information about your program, how it's been set up. And you're just going to double check once a year, make sure it looks right, make sure nothing looks strange. And then if you make any changes, you'll email myself and Beza at hmis@montgomerycountymd.gov. And we'll say, hey, Alex, we made these changes. And we'll be like, cool. Or you'll say, hey, Beza, I'm not really sure if we're supposed to be permanent housing only or housing with services. I'm not sure what the difference is. And then we could talk to you about that. That's all I've really got for you here today. This is our second training on, the provider profile section of HMIS. We've looked at the first part, which is just a provider profile tab in a previous training. We've looked at the standards information. And in our third and final training, we're going to look at just the bed and unit inventory. I hope you'll join me for that because it is very important if you're an agency admin. Thank you for your time, and I'll see you then. Have a great day.